The VA nurse looked up from my chart, then looked back at me with the kind of careful expression medical professionals wear when they think a mistake might be bigger than it first appears. "Mr. Dean," she asked quietly, "why is your son listed as your only living relative?" I smiled politely and told her she must have opened the wrong file. "I also have a daughter," I said, "and 2 grandchildren who make sure I never miss a birthday." She turned the screen toward herself again. "They aren't here." A packet labeled Benefits Review Update already sat beside my clipboard, waiting for my signature before next week's review. At that moment, I knew I would not be signing anything. One missing name had already become one question too many. If you've ever learned that a family can disappear one document at a time, stay with me. The nurse apologized for the confusion and excused herself to verify my records. She returned a few minutes later with the same concerned expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dean. The system still lists Michael Dean as your only living family contact. Has it always?" "No." That single word settled deeper than she probably realized. No. Meaning something had changed. I thanked her for telling me instead of quietly correcting it. Aircraft maintenance teaches you that small discrepancies rarely arrive alone. During my years in the Air Force, a loose fastener almost never remained just a loose fastener. It usually pointed toward vibration somewhere else. You never fixed the symptom before understanding what caused it. I carried the same habit into retirement, especially after losing my wife, Eleanor, 8 months earlier. She had always managed birthdays, addresses, insurance papers, and holiday cards while I managed engines, schedules, and anything with bolts. After the funeral, Michael offered to help organize the paperwork until I found my footing again. At the time, his kindness felt like exactly what a son should do. Now I wasn't as certain. When my appointment ended, Michael was waiting outside the clinic. "Everything go okay?" he asked. "Routine checkup." "Good." He reached into his briefcase and handed me a cream-colored envelope. "The VA mailed updated benefit forms. They need your signature before next week's review." Interesting. The same review mentioned inside the clinic. "They're time-sensitive," he added. "I'll read them tonight." "You don't really need to." He smiled. "It's mostly administrative." Administrative. The nurse had used that word. Michael had used it. Whenever 2 unrelated conversations begin sharing the same language, I pay attention. "I've learned to read paperwork before signing," I said. He laughed. "Still the Air Force technician?" "I suppose so." On the drive home, I stopped at the mailbox. Inside sat another envelope from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The forwarding label had been applied over an older address. Someone had redirected the correspondence before it reached me. That had never happened while Eleanor was alive. I placed both envelopes side by side on my kitchen table beneath the old brass aircraft inspection flashlight I had carried through countless maintenance shifts decades earlier. Eleanor used to tease me for keeping it even after retirement. "One day," she would say, "that flashlight will probably solve a mystery." I smiled at the memory. Then I opened the first envelope. The benefits update looked ordinary. The second contained a survivor benefit notification addressed only to Michael Dean. Not to me, not to my daughter Sarah, only to my son. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt something colder than grief. Someone hadn't simply forgotten Sarah. Someone had begun rewriting my family on paper. I left both VA envelopes exactly where they were until the next morning. Eleanor used to say important papers deserved a full night's sleep before anyone reacted to them. It was one of those quiet rules that had saved us from more than a few expensive mistakes over 47 years of marriage. I made coffee before sunrise, carried her old ceramic mug to the kitchen table, and began reading every page as though I were inspecting an aircraft maintenance log. The first packet looked routine. Updated beneficiary acknowledgments. Emergency contact verification. Benefits review checklist. Nothing alarming. Until I reached the final page. My daughter Sarah's name never appeared once. Neither did Emma or Lucas, my grandchildren. Every section listed only one family member. Michael Dean. I checked the second envelope again. The survivor benefit correspondence had also been addressed only to Michael. That made no sense. Survivor benefits belonged to me after Eleanor's passing, not to whichever child happened to collect the mail. Before assuming anything, I opened the filing cabinet Eleanor had organized for years. Every insurance policy, via letter, tax return, and family certificate sat inside carefully labeled folders. She believed good records were another way of loving the people you left behind. I found last year's VA contact summary. There they were. Sarah, Emma, Lucas. Every name exactly where it belonged. I laid the old summary beside the new packet. The difference wasn't subtle. Someone had deliberately simplified my family. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Michael. Did you get the forms? I did. They're mostly updates. So you said. The review is next week. If you sign everything now, we won't have to worry about delays. Interesting choice. When did Sarah disappear from my records? I asked quietly. Silence. Then a small laugh. Oh, that? Yes. Probably just a computer error after Mom passed. Maybe. I wouldn't overthink it. Aircraft maintenance taught me something else. People rarely answered the exact question when they already feared the answer. I'll stop by tonight, Michael offered. We can finish everything together. I'd appreciate that. He sounded relieved. Exactly as I hoped. When he arrived after dinner, he carried another folder. The VA sometimes duplicates paperwork, he explained. I brought clean copies. Clean. Another interesting word. While he spread the forms across my dining table, his eyes never settled on Eleanor's framed photograph beside the window. He had always looked at it before speaking. Not tonight. I pretended to skim the documents without concern. Then I noticed a separate medical authorization clipped behind the benefits forms. It authorized someone to discuss my treatment and future care. The signature looked similar to mine, not identical. When did I sign this? I asked. Michael reached for the page a little too quickly. Probably after Mom's funeral. I don't remember. You were under a lot of stress. That explanation sounded reasonable. It also sounded prepared. I handed the document back without another question. He smiled. For the first time since the VA appointment, I believed he thought I had accepted his explanation. After he left, I compared the signature on the authorization with an aircraft inspection log I had signed 2 years earlier. The difference was tiny, almost invisible, But one habit never changes. I always wrote the letter D in Dean with a slight backward hook. The authorization ended with a perfectly straight line. Someone had practiced my name. They just hadn't practiced it long enough. The next morning, I placed the medical authorization back inside the folder exactly where Michael had left it. Then I made breakfast, watered Eleanor's roses, and drove to the Aviation Museum, where I volunteered every Tuesday restoring retired Air Force training aircraft. Routine has a way of calming the mind. More importantly, it convinces people nothing has changed. That afternoon, Michael called. "So, did you sign everything?" "Not yet." "You don't want the review delayed." "I'll take care of it." He sounded disappointed for only a moment before recovering. "I can come by again if you need help." "I appreciate that." After hanging up, I smiled despite myself. He believed I still needed guidance. That belief was about to become my greatest advantage. At the museum, I found Linda Morales polishing the aluminum skin of an old T-37 trainer. Before retiring, Linda had spent 32 years working in VA records administration. She understood government paperwork the same way aircraft mechanics understand wiring diagrams. "You only visit my workbench with that serious expression when paper has started misbehaving," she said. "I was hoping you might look at something." We carried the documents into the museum archive room, where faded maintenance manuals lined the shelves. Linda read every page without interruption. When she reached the medical authorization, she adjusted her glasses. "This isn't the first document." "What do you mean?" She pointed toward a small processing code printed near the bottom. "This authorization references an earlier family contact update." "I've never seen one." "That's because this form couldn't exist without it." She turned to another page. "The system always creates a sequence. Contact update, then authorization, then benefit review. Aircraft maintenance used exactly the same logic. No inspection record ever appeared before the maintenance order that created it. Sequence mattered. So if the authorization exists," Linda finished the sentence, "someone changed your family records first." The room suddenly felt much smaller. Until then, I had assumed the forged signature represented the beginning. Instead, it appeared near the middle. I had been investigating the wrong starting point. Linda continued examining the paperwork. "These processing dates bother me." "Why?" "The family contact revision and medical authorization were entered only 6 minutes apart." "Is that unusual?" She nodded. "Very." "Why?" "Real updates almost never happen that quickly." She leaned back thoughtfully. Someone already had every answer prepared. That single observation changed the investigation. Preparation meant intention, not confusion, not accident. Before leaving, Linda wrote down the records office where archived audit logs were stored. "If you request the activity history instead of only the current record," she said quietly, "you'll see when each change happened. And maybe who requested it. Maybe." As I drove home, I noticed Michael's truck parked in my driveway. He was sitting on the porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been hard to catch," he said with a smile. "I've been busy." He handed me 1 cup. "I talked with the benefits advisor today." "The review office?" "Yes. They said everything should go smoothly once the paperwork is signed." Interesting. I had never mentioned speaking with anyone from the VA, yet somehow Michael already knew exactly which office mattered. I thanked him, unlocked the front door, and invited him inside. For the next hour, we talked about ordinary things: museum projects, baseball scores, Eleanor's favorite recipes. Not once did he mention Sarah. Not once. When he finally left, I looked at the untouched second coffee cup still sitting on my kitchen counter. The silence around my daughter had become louder than every explanation my son had offered. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to ask what had changed. I was going to ask the records themselves. The following morning, I drove to the VA records office carrying nothing more than a folder Eleanor had labeled "Family Documents" in her neat blue handwriting. She had always believed labels prevented confusion. Looking at that folder now, I wondered how many people had ignored the one label that mattered most. Linda had been right about one thing already. If someone changed my family records, there would be a sequence. Aircraft maintenance had taught me that no mechanical failure ever appeared without a timeline. Paperwork worked the same way. The records clerk accepted my request without hesitation. "I'd like a complete activity history," I said. "Not just my current record." She looked pleasantly surprised. "Most people only ask for the current file. I'd rather understand how it changed." 20 minutes later, she returned with a printed audit history. Every administrative update, every modification, every processing date. Exactly what I needed. The first pages showed ordinary address updates stretching back years. Then everything changed. 8 days after Eleanor's funeral, someone updated my emergency contacts. Sarah disappeared. Emma disappeared. Lucas disappeared. Michael became my only listed family member. 6 minutes later came the medical authorization entry Linda had predicted. 3 days after that, survivor benefit correspondence routing changed. Nothing happened randomly. Everything followed a precise order. I thanked the clerk and quietly asked one final question. "Can you tell who requested these changes?" "I'm sorry," she replied. "The printed audit doesn't include that information." "What does?" She hesitated. "The original intake packet." "Where would that be?" "In the benefits review file." Exactly where Michael wanted me to sign paperwork next week. The beginning of the mystery was waiting at the end of the process. As I walked toward my truck, my phone rang. It was Sarah. We hadn't spoken much since Eleanor's funeral, not because of anger, but because grief affects people differently. Sarah withdrew into caring for her children. I buried myself in routines. "Dad," she said softly, "Michael told me you've been dealing with via paperwork." "I have. He said everything's under control." "Interesting. I didn't realize he had mentioned it. He told me not to worry you with extra questions." I looked back toward the VA building. "Sarah, when was the last time anyone from the VA contacted you?" Silence. "Never." "What do you mean?" "I've never received anything. Not one letter. Not one phone call. Not one emergency contact verification." If Sarah truly no longer existed inside my records, the silence suddenly made perfect sense. After hanging up, I drove straight to the Aviation Museum instead of going home. Linda was cataloging old maintenance manuals when I walked into the archive room. Without saying a word, I handed her the audit history. She studied every page carefully. Finally, She pointed toward one processing code. This one doesn't belong. What do you mean? The emergency contact update was entered through a benefits advisor. I thought families usually updated those records. They do. But this code identifies an assisted filing. She looked directly at me. Someone inside the review process helped prepare these documents. Not necessarily illegally, not necessarily dishonestly, but someone had done far more than simply process paperwork. The investigation had just grown larger than my own family. As I gathered the papers, Linda stopped me one last time. If I were you, she said quietly, I wouldn't confront Michael yet. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because once people believe you've accepted the paperwork, they usually finish the rest. I smiled. Aircraft maintenance had another rule. Sometimes the only way to find the hidden crack inside a wing was to let the inspection continue long enough for every related defect to reveal itself. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I believed I finally understood what I needed to do. I was going to let everyone believe I was ready to sign. The hardest part of pretending nothing was wrong wasn't fooling Michael. It was fooling myself. Every instinct I had developed during 30 years maintaining Air Force aircraft told me to stop the process the moment I discovered something unsafe. Instead, I had to let it continue just long enough for the hidden problem to reveal itself completely. The following afternoon, Michael stopped by carrying sandwiches from the deli Eleanor used to love. I figured you shouldn't be eating alone, he said. I appreciate that. We ate on the back porch overlooking the small vegetable garden Eleanor had planted every spring. For a while we talked about tomatoes, baseball, and whether the old maple tree needed trimming before winter. Then Michael finally brought up the review. The benefits advisor called again. Oh. She said if we finish everything before Friday, the review will be simple. The advisor called you? Well, she was following up. Interesting. The review belonged to me. Yet the reminders kept reaching my son. I nodded as though nothing about that seemed unusual. Tell her I'll bring the paperwork. His shoulders relaxed. Exactly as I hoped. After he left, I drove to the museum where Linda had already arranged something I hadn't expected. Waiting inside the archive office was a woman named Karen Whitmore, a retired VA compliance supervisor who had spent decades auditing benefit records. Linda trusted very few people. If she trusted Karen, so did I. Karen reviewed the audit history in complete silence. Then she asked one question. Have you actually spoken with the benefits advisor? No. Has she ever contacted you directly? Never. She folded the papers neatly. That's not normal. Why? Benefits advisors communicate with the veteran, not the veteran's adult child. Unless, she finished my thought, unless someone has already represented that the child is managing the veteran's affairs. The room fell completely silent. I slowly reached for the medical authorization. Karen examined the processing code. This explains it. What? If this authorization had been accepted without challenge, staff would reasonably believe your son was the primary family representative. Not because I was incapable, because the paperwork said so. The mechanism finally appeared. Removing Sarah hadn't been the objective. It had been the foundation. Everything afterward depended on making Michael appear to be the only family member naturally involved in every decision. Karen continued studying the records. One more thing. She pointed toward a routing number printed in tiny type beneath the survivor benefit correspondence. This mail wasn't simply redirected. It was reassigned. What does that mean? The system now treats your son's address as the primary destination for review notices. Not permanently, but long enough for the upcoming review. Aircraft maintenance had another lesson. Temporary modifications often caused permanent damage when nobody removed them afterward. I finally understood what Linda meant. The paperwork wasn't designed to last forever. It only needed to survive until Friday. That evening, I called Sarah. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I asked her something difficult. "If anyone asks," I said gently, "please don't contact the VA yet." She sounded surprised. "Why not?" "Because I need everyone to believe nothing is wrong." She trusted me without asking another question. Hanging up hurt more than I expected. Keeping my daughter in the dark felt wrong, but exposing the scheme too early might leave her permanently erased from the official record if someone quietly destroyed the evidence before the review. Late that night, another envelope arrived by overnight delivery. Inside was a revised benefits packet. The cover letter thanked me for my continued cooperation and reminded me that Friday represented the final opportunity to complete all pending administrative updates before the review. Someone believed I had already agreed. Exactly the illusion I intended to preserve. Friday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that usually settles over an aircraft hangar before the first inspection begins. I carried Eleanor's blue folder under one arm and the old brass inspection flashlight in my coat pocket. I had not used that flashlight to examine an airplane in more than 20 years, yet somehow bringing it with me felt right. Some habits remind you who you were before everything became complicated. The VA benefits office occupied the second floor of the same building where the nurse had first asked why my son was listed as my only living relative. Michael was already waiting in the lobby. He smiled when he saw the folder. "I'm glad you brought everything." "So am I." "You'll see. This won't take long." His confidence sounded genuine, not triumphant. That distinction mattered. People trapped by bad decisions often hope paperwork will rescue them from explaining those decisions. Karen Ellis introduced herself a few minutes later. She appeared calm, professional, and perfectly organized. "Mr. Dean," she said warmly, "we appreciate your cooperation." Cooperation. The same word that had followed me through nearly every conversation since this began. She led us into a private office and arranged the revised benefit packet neatly across the table. Emergency contacts, medical authorization, benefit acknowledgments, review certification. Every document reflected the same quiet assumption. Michael represented my family. Sarah no longer existed inside the administrative process. Karen pointed toward the signature lines. "If everything looks correct, we can complete today's review." I adjusted my reading glasses. "I'd like to take one more careful look." "Of course." No impatience, no pressure, only confidence. Exactly what Linda had predicted. As I slowly turned the pages, another staff member knocked gently on the office door. "Karen," she said, "the audit confirmation you requested just arrived." Karen accepted a sealed envelope without thinking. She thanked the employee, placed the envelope beside my paperwork, and continued explaining the forms. She never noticed the printed heading visible through the partially opened flap. Administrative Activity Verification, The audit. The very document Linda hoped someone would request after believing the paperwork was ready. Karen kept talking. This confirms every required update before today's review. Before she could place the envelope into her file, I asked quietly, "May I see that confirmation?" She hesitated, only briefly. "Certainly." She handed it across the table. The report summarized every administrative action associated with my account during the previous month. Most entries matched the audit history I already possessed. One entry did not. Representative relationship verified by advisor interview. Interview date: 2 days after Eleanor's funeral. Interview participant: Michael Dean, not Harold Dean. I looked toward my son. He lowered his eyes. Karen continued speaking before realizing why the room had suddenly become silent. The verification simply confirms. She stopped reading. For the first time since we met, uncertainty crossed her face. She turned another page, then another. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, "Why wasn't the veteran interviewed?" No one answered, because no one could. The records themselves had begun asking the questions. Karen reached for her keyboard. "I need to check something." Within seconds, another notification appeared on her screen. The original family contact update had been submitted electronically before the advisor interview ever occurred, meaning the interview hadn't created the change. It had merely approved one already waiting inside the system. Discovery had just become official administrative evidence. I quietly closed the folder. "I don't think I'm ready to sign today." Karen looked directly at me. "No," she answered softly. "I don't believe you should." Michael finally spoke. "Dad, I can explain." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know. But not here." He nodded slowly. Across the table, Karen remained completely still, staring at the audit report that had answered one question while creating another far more painful one. Who had convinced my son that removing his own sister from my life on paper was somehow protecting our family? Karen Ellis asked if we would move to a smaller conference room away from the public waiting area. No one argued. The audit report lay on the table between us like an engine part that had finally failed inspection. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply impossible to ignore. Michael sat across from me with both hands wrapped around a paper cup that had long since gone cold. Karen looked first at him, then at me. "Mr. Dean," she said quietly, "before we continue, I need to clarify that today's review is suspended until these administrative discrepancies are resolved." I nodded. I expected that. She opened the audit file again. The records now show several updates that should never have been approved without directly confirming them with you. Michael closed his eyes. "I never thought it would go this far." Karen turned toward him. "What do you mean by that?" He took a long breath before answering. "After Mom died, collection agencies started calling every day. I stayed silent. Not because I wasn't hurting, because I wanted the truth to arrive before emotion interrupted it. My wife had emergency surgery 2 years ago," Michael continued. "Insurance covered most of it, but not everything. We refinanced the house, borrowed against retirement savings, and still fell behind." His voice shook. "I thought I could fix it." Karen listened without speaking. Then I met with you, Michael said. She frowned. I remember discussing benefit procedures. You said family paperwork needed to be simplified before the review. Karen immediately shook her head. I said records should be accurate. Michael stared at the table. I heard what I wanted to hear. Silence settled over the room. At last I understood. Karen had not created the scheme. She had unknowingly become part of it because Michael had interpreted practical guidance as permission to solve problems his own way. But someone still approved the changes, I said calmly. Karen nodded. They were processed because the electronic submission represented that the veteran had already reviewed them. She looked directly at Michael. Did your father authorize any of those updates? His answer came almost immediately. No. The room became very still. Karen opened another section of the audit packet. There is one more document. She removed the original electronic submission summary. Every update appeared in order. Emergency contacts, medical authorization, correspondence routing. Exactly the sequence Linda had predicted weeks earlier. Attached to the submission history was a scanned cover sheet. The sender information identified Michael's home computer. Not the VA, not my house. Michael covered his face. I told myself I'd correct everything after Dad's review. When? I asked quietly. As soon as we got through the creditors. You erased your sister first. I never wanted to erase Sarah. But you did. Tears filled his eyes. I thought fewer names meant fewer questions. Karen gently slid the papers toward my attorney, who had arrived after receiving Linda's earlier call. He reviewed each document carefully before speaking. The activity history, the electronic submission records, the correspondence changes, and today's audit establish one continuous administrative sequence. No dramatic accusation, no raised voices. Just documentation. Years spent maintaining aircraft had taught me that real failures rarely announced themselves with explosions. Most simply accumulated until someone finally compared every inspection in the correct order. Karen looked at me. Mr. Dean, your daughter can be fully restored to your records. I nodded slowly. She never should have disappeared. Michael whispered, I know. The administrative scheme had collapsed. The paperwork no longer supported the lie. But as I looked across the table at my son, I realized restoring records would be much easier than restoring trust. 6 weeks later, I walked back into the same VA clinic, carrying Eleanor's blue folder beneath one arm and the old brass inspection flashlight in my coat pocket. The nurse who had first asked why my son was listed as my only living relative recognized me immediately. She smiled before opening my record. This time, she said, turning the monitor toward me, I'd like you to check it yourself. I adjusted my glasses. There they were. Michael, Sarah, Emma, Lucas. Every name restored exactly where it belonged. No one had been erased. No one had been replaced. The audit remained permanently attached to my administrative file, documenting every unauthorized change and every corrective action. Karen Ellis completed an internal review of the processing failures and introduced new verification procedures requiring direct confirmation from veterans before family records could be substantially altered. The paperwork that had once hidden the truth now helped protect someone else's family from facing the same mistake. Michael came to my house that Sunday afternoon. He wasn't carrying forms. He wasn't carrying explanations. Only Eleanor's old address book. "I found this while cleaning our attic," he said quietly. "It reminded me of something Mom used to tell us." I opened the worn cover. Every birthday, every anniversary, every address. Written carefully in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. No one had ever been left out. Michael sat across from me without speaking for several minutes. Finally, he looked up. "I thought I was protecting my family." "I know. I never realized I was taking yours apart." Those words mattered because they arrived without excuses. Debt had explained his fear. It had never justified his choices. Sarah joined us later that afternoon with Emma and Lucas. No dramatic speeches followed. No perfect reunion erased the months of hurt. Trust returns much more slowly than paperwork. We spent the evening doing something Eleanor always loved, updating the family address book together. This time, every name was written twice, once in ink, once in memory. Before everyone left, Emma noticed the old brass flashlight lying on the kitchen table. "Grandpa," she asked, "why do you still keep that old thing?" I smiled. "It reminds me that the smallest light is often enough to find the one detail everyone else missed." She nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Maybe someday it would. If this story reminded you that families are protected not only by love, but also by honesty, careful attention, and the courage to ask difficult questions, I hope you'll carry that lesson into someone else's life. May your records always reflect the people you cherish, your truth never be hidden by convenience, and your family remain united by honesty instead of silence. God bless you.